So, on with the show. Ben Taylor Davis, aka Regen Ben, is a farmer, and he's a very special farmer because he's a regenerative farmer. And what I know about regenerative farming is that it means that you grow food and you harvest it and you leave the soil in a condition that means you can grow more food next year without having to put lots of horrible chemicals all over it, which damage everything. That's it. That's all I know about regenerative farming now. So, in about an hour's time, I'm hoping I'm going to know a whole load more.
Cool.
So, I'm going to introduce Ben Taylor Davis. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the intro. So yes, farmer, brief history really. We farm over in Ross-on-Wye, and I'm sure most people are more familiar with Ross-on-Wye of our beautiful river that was and now is treated more of a open sewer than the beautiful river that started off the very birth of tourism all those centuries ago. The farm is just over 500 acres. It's a family farm. My parents moved here in 1974, which isn't that long ago. They used to farm in Worcester, and so did my grandfather and great grandfather. But my father had a passion and wanted to grow potatoes. And the farm and the soil type that they had in Worcester was heavy clay. And in 1974, sold up our Worcester farm and bought this farm in Ross that was able to grow potatoes and veg and all those sort of things. So yeah, he moved down here in 74. It just so happens in 74, the government actually published a paper, and it was called Mixed Farming and Model Thinking, and basically came to the conclusion that any kind of mixed farming was not that efficient. And in order to drive efficiency, you needed to specialize. And all the advisors and everybody that's sent from the government were advising people to either become a livestock farmer or an arable farmer. And then when you decided that you wanted to be an arable farmer, they then decided that in actual fact, if you could narrow down and become a professional grower of a certain crop, that would be also in the best interest of efficiency. So tragically, that sort of thing happened. The scene set in the background here is a story of our farm. My mum named it New Horizons. Basically, how we farmed for probably 30 years in the centre there, along with most of the rest of, sadly, the whole United Kingdom, and where we are and where we're aspiring to, surrounding that with Ross in the background and lots of diversity and green and healthier river and all that sort of thing. And I'll hopefully talk you through how we're achieving this. Let's just hope. Now, farming is actually quite an incredible business model, um, because we take free things and make money. And the last time we looked, the water in the form of rain was still free, and they hadn't managed to tax it. And the sun's energy is still free, thankfully, and so is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we capture these three things and we put them through our catalyst, or what we often call soil, and we produce food, and that's very saleable. What an incredible business model that is, which is surprising when you see then that most farms across the world, this is some Canadian data, but it's very, very transferable across every single country, that most farms actually struggle to make profitability. However, those people that are supplying us very helpfully are, as you can probably see, seem to get more and more profitable as that gap ever widens. That's a bit of a challenge. And one of the big things for a lot of people these days on regenerative farming is the very fact that we're on a treadmill currently of spending and spending and spending on inputs, and only to see that their profitability is ever diminishing. There's a reason for the problems that are faced. There's not many countries that can go back to 1264 and plot historic data on a price of a commodity, but here we are looking at wheat, and we're taking into a case of inflation. And as you can see, it was very much up and down seasonal, but the gradual curve, as the world population increased, the demand increased for wheat, and therefore the price rose. And then tragically, we found that guano, found off the South American islands there, rich in phosphate and nitrogen, were imported into Europe and into the UK as a very efficient fertilizer. For those that don't know, it's basically the excrement of birds built up over millennia. And as we started driving efficiencies, then of course what actually happened was all we did was drive the price down, followed by probably the most ridiculous word, green revolution, anything but green. It sounds like I'm getting a cold. And then, of course, GMOs. Now, whilst we don't have GMOs or genetically modified organisms in the UK, they're very prevalent in the rest of the world, and that, of course, drives other commodities that track the price of wheat down, such as corn and soybean. So, in actual fact, for every single efficiency we try and gain in agriculture, all it does is ever drive the price further and further down. One thing we don't talk about that much is the fact that us as farmers are becoming morons, and it's a real challenge to become and get off this ridiculous cycle of buying. And what's happening is we're just literally buying more and more and more, and we're putting more and more products on. And as things are getting more benign, as in the soil, we're having to spend even more to compensate for the lack of soil quality. And sadly, you could almost say that farmers are being farmed, and that's a real problem. And that's something we really have to try and get out of. Everybody that seems to latch onto farming is making money, except the farmer himself. I talk quite a lot about the word yield. And it's really important that we do mention the word yield, because that is all about the produce or provide a natural agricultural or industrial product. And yield is really quite important for two reasons. Number one, this is the vanity that is farming, certainly when they get down to a pub, and we call it pub yields when we start talking about what we're growing. And if you ask anybody, yield is king. And yield is king, but I talk about yield in a very different way, because it has, of course, a second meaning. Give way to demands of pressure. In other words, in actual fact, we need to stop and just think about what we're doing. You know, as I said before, it's a very, very easy business model. Three things: make money. We're all in debt. We're all being sold product on product on product. In actual fact, it's about time sooner or later that you actually stop and give way to all these demands and the pressure of the salesman, and start thinking about your own farm. I'm going to talk about how a healthy plant and soil relationship functions. And it's very simple. Again, as you know, sunlight, CO2, and water all go into a plant. And that of course, makes carbohydrates through photosynthesis, wonderful tool. And then every evening, that carbohydrate, through the action of boron, the trapdoor, a lot of that carbohydrate pours into the root. And that's really important. And it actually gets expanded out of the root. And this feeds what is so important: billions and billions of microbes in our soil. 1 teaspoon of soil contains about 7 billion microbes. And that's really important that it does this plant relationship, because in return, these microbes forage for all these wonderful nutrients and give them back to the plant. Now, interesting enough, these microorganisms like us are breathing in oxygen and releasing CO2. And that's rather quite important, because the CO2 actually bonds with the soil moisture and creates a thing called carbonic acid. It makes the soil slightly acid, which actually dissolves some more mineral and puts it into a microbial food for the plant. Nothing is wasted in nature. It's quite incredible. But that's only part of the CO2. There's also about 2/3 of the CO2 remain in the soil. And of course, if we were to sit in a greenhouse and pump it full of CO2, eventually we would suffocate, and that becomes a problem. So what happens? Well, the moon has the most amazing impact on our tides and our oceans. It pulls and pushes water through the action of gravity, and it does exactly the same in our soil, assuming our soil is not compacted or not totally dysfunctional. And what happens is, as the moon phase occurs, it pulls on soil moisture, like it does on the oceans, and all of this CO2 in the soil gets squeezed, and it gets squeezed out of the soil surface. And there's absolutely every reason why the stomata is on the underside of nearly every leaf on planet Earth. Because, of course, if you're ever going to capture the efficiency of CO2, then you can drag it out of the soil rather than the atmosphere, because there's six times more CO2 in the soil than there is in the air. That's quite amazing. And then it just so happens, as the soil moisture goes down, our atmosphere is 21% oxygen and 78% nitrogen. That pours into the soil. This happens every 12 hours, 25 minutes. And as I say to many people, your soil should breathe every 12 hours, 25 minutes. If you have a soil that is uncompacted and has all of the life in it, you will have an incredible living, breathing organism. And as I talk about, everybody is a livestock farmer. Most of our livestock is invisible. These microbes in our soil that we just can't see with the naked eye. But what we do know is you would never give a day off of food to the livestock you have on your farm, and neither should you to these invisible livestock. Soil microbes love that carbohydrate that comes out of those plant roots every day, and that's really important that that's there. But if you don't have a plant in the soil, then it actually looks for dead plant roots. They act as a straw for the carbohydrate. So there's still some carbohydrate in the straw. They'll eat those dead plant roots. If, unfortunately, there's no dead plant roots, it feeds on any sort of crop residue it can find. And lastly, if there's none of that available, they actually feed on organic matter. They actually start eating the house they live in. It's a real problem. And so if you ever see bare soil on farms, ploughed soils that are just left for weeks, months, and everything, you can pretty much guarantee that these microbes that are trying to survive are burning away the organic matter. And that's a real problem. This is what it looks like, this organic matter in the soil. Sorry, this is what the carbon amino acid looks like coming out of a plant root. It's rather quite amazing when you start seeing how much carbon comes out of these plant roots every single day. This is in 12 plants in 14 days. And this here are the microbes. And as you can see, there's the plant roots at the top, and the microbes are actually going into the plant root and out of the plant root, exchanging these all the elements in order for that plant to grow. And it's called the rhizophagy cycle. And it's rather quite amazing. And these soil microbes, some of them are quite awesome. There's billions and billions of different types, but this little thing called the tardigrade, often called the water bear, is something quite remarkable, because they survive without water for 120 years. You can freeze them to almost 0 degree Kelvin. You can boil them. They can survive the vacuum of space, pressure 6 times greater than the deepest ocean, and doses of X-rays and gamma rays that are lethal to everything, including cockroach. Yet we can kill them with synthetic pesticides and anthelmintics, as in wormers. We have to be very aware that pesticides, and you mentioned it in your introduction, are really quite vicious, but we rarely ever mention the word anthelmintics, as in these wormers that are actually far worse, certainly for our soil biota. And that's something we have to be very aware of. This rather messy thing called the soil food web is how plants naturally get food. You have bacteria, and then protozoa eat your bacteria, and then nematodes eat your protozoa, and then an earthworm will eat your nematode, and it's called the trophic levels. And as each one goes up a trophic level, they excrete nitrogen and phosphate and all these wonderful elements in order to make them plant available. There's a wonderful chap called Albert Howard who wrote the Agricultural Testament, and he wrote about the golden worm ratio. And this is what goes into a worm compared to what comes out, and this is the importance of worms. So what comes out of a worm is 2 times the amount of humus, 5 times the amount of nitrogen, 7 times phosphate, and 11 times potassium. So every worm you have is a mini fertilizer factory. As it's gobbling up the nematodes and the protozoas and things, it's excreting plant available. And this is a highly efficient plant available nutrition. And it's really important. If you have lots of earthworms, that means they have to have lots of nematodes and protozoa and then bacteria, and you know you've got a healthy soil. So we're looking for shovelfuls or spadefuls of worms every time you put your fork in the ground. Now, interesting enough, there's a picture of a mole in the bottom right-hand corner. Mole's favourite food, of course, is the earthworm. Now, you only have to go back to the 1960s to see that there were mole catchers in every parish in the UK. That was a very employable source of income. There is barely a mole catcher per county these days because, sadly, there's no earthworms left, therefore there's no moles, or very few. And therefore, in actual fact, we know the state of our soils just by understanding that we haven't got any mole catchers left. So I farm to 5 key principles. And the first one is that of what we call limited disturbance. So this is our tractor here, drilling our wheat crop into a cover crop. So as you can see, we're still using the sun's energy from all that cover crop. We're gathering all that soil microbial food continuously. Then we plant the next crop. So we keep green material living at all times. It's really important. But limited disturbance is also all about the disturbance caused by pesticides. So if you're going to just buy a direct drill, like you've just seen, then if you spray everything to within an inch of life, that's going to cause massive disturbance. Whereas in actual fact, rather than use all these pesticides, what about doing some wonderful things like planting these margins on our farm that bring all the beneficials in, which means we don't need to use pesticides. We have that much life and biology around our farm. In actual fact, all these flowers provide all these beneficials that go into the crop and feast on aphid and any other nasty that might be lurking in our crop, and you have a much more balanced system. We can talk about nitrogen very briefly. The Haber-Bosch process was designed for fertilizers, but first and foremost, it was designed for bomb making ammonium nitrate, and these bombs destroy soil. So it's any wonder that fertilizer made of ammonium nitrate also bombs soil. And like I say to so many people, this is the same result, just a different scale. These fertilizers are horrific for our soil, and it just creates deserts. The second principle we farm to is a thing called living roots. And as you can tell, the living root was really important at pouring out all those root exudates. On the left-hand side, you can see that spade full of about 25 earthworms. Fantastic. That's my mini fertilizer factory. The center photograph shows a bean root covered in nitrogen-fixing rhizobias, compared to on the right-hand side of that photograph, artificial nitrogen. I can get my nitrogen from plants fixing nitrogen. I don't need to buy it. It's very expensive and very damaging to my soil. And on the right-hand side is a photograph I took actually in Australia, but I thought it highlighted the fact amazing that how important these living roots are to prevent erosion. And how important it is to keep everything fully growing as green as you possibly can. It's massively important with all the diversity of all these different roots. Really quite important. The third principle as we farm to is that of what we call armor. And armoring the soil, in other words, keeping it covered. And here's a very, very simple example of bare soil on the same day at 44.6 degrees. And as you got under the mulch that you saw my drill pushing down, it's 28 degrees. And the difference between those two, in actual fact, and I don't know whether this slide's still in here because I've removed hundreds, is the very fact that microbes survive beautifully and reproduce at 28 degrees and at 44 degrees. Sadly, they have, oh, there you are. Sadly, they totally and utterly die off. The difference between microbes working in your soil, producing all these wonderful nutrition, is the difference between having mulch and not. The fourth principle I farm to is a thing called diversity. And thankfully, the whole COVID experience tells us that diversity is quite important. We are all the same species. However, thankfully, we are all genetically different. We are mutations of each other, which means in actual fact, sadly, some of us got very poorly. Some of us died. Some of us caught the COVID many, many times and didn't suffer at all. And some of us didn't get it at all. That's due to the wonderful thing that is diversity. What we do on farming as a general rule is plant single clone species on the right-hand side that gets full of disease. Yeah, all you need to do is mix a load of species together. And funny enough, as you can see in the photograph at the bottom, the disease stops immediately as soon as you just add a simple thing like diversity. Diversity also becomes really important when you plant. This is an all-seed rape crop with lots of companions of bursting clover, vetch, and buckwheat. And this is the start of our agroforestry scheme that I'm going to elaborate on a bit later. And this is our agroforestry scheme. So these are trees, but with wildflowers in between all our crops. And the fifth one is that integration of livestock, really quite important because they do so much for so many things. This is our vineyard on the left-hand side, where our vineyard has absolute, it's called the hands-off vineyard. We do nothing other than use sheep for 3 days a month to convert the top bit part into the bottom part. They do a wonderful job. Look at our wonderful goats. The most important thing for goat food is things like docks, thistles, nettles, all your natural weed control. And on the right-hand side is our pigs rooting around doing a wonderful job at actually, assuming you give them enough space and time, they never return to the same patch twice and always root over a new patch. They are like nature's plows. They do a wonderful job. So if we want to reseed a grass for whatever reason, we can use our pigs to actually do all our cultivations. Here's a photograph of our flock and a herd. So we keep all our animals together. It makes far more sense for diversity. And it fulfills pretty much everything we've got here. There's no disturbance. There's living roots. There's armor of the soil. There's diversity and integration of livestock. And here's a bit of proof from the University of Cambridge. I suspect I've spoken for more than 15, 20 minutes, but anyway, that's me done.
Thank you. No, I think that was very good timing. Very fascinating. Lots of detail, lots of really good stuff. And I look forward to all the questions. There's already some in the chat. If you could take the slide down, then we'll be able to see our people a bit better. I'm going to put view gallery so I can see everyone. Okay, so we have some questions. Chat. How far? Okay, Willem got in first. So he says, question, regenerative farming will secure the quality of our soil longer term, enabling us to continue to feed ourselves. Yeah, statement of truth. But in the short term, yields are less than with intensive farming, and regenerative farming will thus make us less able to feed ourselves. Is this right? Ben.
No.
Ah,
No, it's amazing that myth is being spread around. It would be right if you woke up one morning and decided that you were going to just become fully regenerative. Because what people fail to realize is our soils are chemical and mechanical junkies, as bad as a drug as somebody absolutely addicted to drugs. And if you just go cold turkey one morning and don't tell your soil or prepare your soil in any way, then unfortunately you will see a huge dip in yields. You will see an absolute catastrophe for your bank balance, more to the point too. But what you have to do is like any drug taker, is actually wean your soils away from the chemical and mechanical problems, by introducing compost teas and compost extracts and life and living roots, and a gradual removal of all of the nasties, so to speak. But to go cold turkey, you're going to end up with some horrific problems.
can I come back?
Yeah, go for
Yes,
it.
of course.
Okay, so I mean, I don't have a lot of knowledge, but I listened to a talk about regenerative farming for the campaign for rural England in Norfolk, and this farmer, yeah, so his profitability was maintained by going regenerative, right? Because he didn't put all these expensive chemicals, but his yield went down. So, um, so and I could understand that. But so you're saying, so regenerative, your yield has not gone down because you stopped using all these pesticides
No, not at
and
all.
other chem. Oh,
No, but
brilliant!
there's an awful lot of people trying to do regenerative farming wrongly. If I'm
Right,
honest, it's I've read over 700 books and done over 1,000 different studies on the farm to
right,
actually start to understand the fundamentals of how it all works. Now, a lot of people sadly watch two YouTube videos, read one book, and then have a go, and often get it terribly wrong. There's a couple of points to add. Let's be absolutely honest. The problem of world food supply at the moment has got nothing to do with yield; it's to do with waste. So first and
yeah.
foremost, it's an irrelevant argument if we're still talking about yield, because we are producing enough food currently to feed 15 billion people. So that it's definitely not a food supply problem. So even if yields were to go down, that would be a great thing, because hopefully we can focus on the ridiculous amount of waste that goes on at the moment in every form of agriculture. It's absolutely horrific.
I agree. Yep, yep.
But if our yields have maintained, some of them have gone up. In actual fact, our potatoes have gone up.
Oh,
Um,
great.
so we're rather quite thrilled on certain things. Yeah, so
All right, that's good news. Thank you.
no problem.
So I have a question. When I see the pictures of your biodiversity with lots of different plants growing together, it makes me wonder how you harvest.
Okay. It depends what we're doing and how we're growing it. So some of the biodiversity that we grow, so say we're growing an oilseed rape crop with buckwheat and vetch and berseem clover. So you plant it in late August, early September. The buckwheat and the vetch often are taken out by the first frost. So we use nature to do that. And then things like the berseem clover or various other things, we can either graze out with animals, or we'll hoe them, or we harvest the two together and then separate them at harvest. It's very simple. As long as you've got two seed types that are distinctively different in size. So if you have a vetch seed, for instance, and an oilseed rape seed, they're very different. You can pass them through a very simple sieve. And there's most farms have these either ability or to get a contractor in. And interesting enough, it was Darwin that did the studies initially on growing two crops together and realizing that you got what was the Darwin effect, he called it, which is 110% of potential yield, in so much as you get so much of the one crop, and then the other crop will intercept more light and moisture and various things, and you add the two yields together, and it will always out yield a single variety, single crop. So in actual fact, that's another reason that we can actually increase yields by growing two things together as companions.
Wow. So it does very much depend on you knowing what to grow together and how to deal with the results. It's not just,
Absolutely.
I was imagining you harvesting this whole field of stuff, and then you've got, oh, we've got two or three different things here. Now what?
No, I mean, sadly, I wish I could just sit down with my great grandfather, who I obviously never knew. And I think he'd sit there and say, he would just shrug his shoulders and say, "Well, yeah, this is what we've been doing for the last 2,000 years in the UK." Then, unfortunately, the Green Revolution lost all. It's a little bit like the Dark Ages of the Green Revolution. We forgot everything we knew. And therefore, in actual fact, because it was so easy to reach for a can or a packet or something and do that job, and we're just having to relearn. I think the science is probably, there's more science behind what we're doing now. Although I don't ever diss the science of 3 generations ago, because their science was 1,000 years of trial and error. Well, that's fantastic science, isn't it? So they knew what they would. I mean, it's ridiculous when you consider winter wheat, for instance. We plant winter wheat, 185 kilos a hectare, all very mathematical. We all work it out. In actual fact, it's 100 weight and a half an acre, and that's what they did for over 1,000 years before. But we've tried to make it more complex. But they knew how to plant crops and grow them well.
Yeah, no, I bet you wish you could talk to your great grandfather.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question. This one's from Jill. Did your adjoining farmers think you were mad, or are they coming round? She says this was James Rebank's experience. So did you have problems with your neighbours who thought you were doing everything all wrong?
Yeah, pretty much. Neighbours thought us start raving mad, and then the contractor was the first one that came and said that this is fantastic. You just keep telling us what you're doing, and we'll be happy to come, and we get contractors in to do a lot of the work because it's so expensive, the machinery these days. It's far easier to get somebody in that's well kitted up, and our contractors are very prepared to learn and do, and then push it across their own farmland and contracting. So and my neighbours, yeah, started off not even speaking, and then you notice them walking around the footpaths of your farm, and then you have a cup of tea, and then they're like, "Go on, then just explain, not in detail, just how does that work over there? What are you doing?" And then you talk, and you see them start smiling and that sort of thing, and then it becomes. And I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube clip, and it's called "The Lone Nut." Has anybody ever seen that? I don't know. And just Google the Lone Nut on YouTube, and I was that, and you'll know exactly who I was on that little video. It's the most amazing little video of how basically a movement is created. But if you can get somebody, if you can be easy to follow, if you're very happy to share information and embrace the people that follow you, then following is possible. If you make it absolutely complex, then people won't follow.
Well, good. So you just did what you did and waited for them to come round.
Yeah, there's a huge backstory to that I haven't had time to talk about. My son sadly got kicked in the head by a horse, and that gave me huge depression when his brain was smashed to pieces. And he was only 16 months old, and I had a terrible mental breakdown for 3 years, and I ended up doing a thing called a Nuffield scholarship, where I travelled the world and had to for my own sanity, and met all these wonderful people around the world doing this regenerative farming, and it was the farming of regenerative farming when I came back that actually cured my mind, and it's why I'm sat here now smiling and probably talking to
Oh,
you.
brilliant. And
So
cured a lot of other things as well while it was
oh,
out.
absolutely.
Okay,
So
so next question. Is the NFU interested in regenerative farming?
um I've got to be careful what I say. This is on YouTube, isn't it? I don't know what they're interested in, really, if I'm absolutely honest. I mean, I've left the NFU as a member because they don't represent. I just think they try and defend all farming. And in actual fact, some farming is bloody awful, if I'm absolutely honest, and horrific, and it needs calling out and stopping and challenging and and saying that's just really poor practice. Stop it. That's my gripe with the NFU. They should be raising the bar for agriculture and setting a standard rather than trying to actually defend the lowest denominator, which I have a real problem with. So. They would say they definitely support regenerative farming. I'm not sure how or what or if I'm not absolutely honest.
So not very positively by the sounds of it.
Well, but possibly, but not in my experience really.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, this is a really interesting question and a good one because Speak Up for Our Planet is very, very interested in what we can do.
Yep.
Is there a way that we as consumers can support regenerative farming or know how regenerative the products we buy are? How can we support what you're doing?
So it's starting to get branded. I don't know if you're familiar with a product called Wild Farmed. Andy Cato of what was Groove Armada is basically a really good guy that's going into Marks and Spencer's now. You can buy bread from M&S and Waitrose that is farmed regeneratively through Wild Farms of who we grow for. So that's definitely a vote with your pocket. But more importantly than that, it's to get on the social media channels and just be a bit mouthy and say this is poor practice. This is good practice. We want a world where this is commonplace. I would love my agriculture to not be called regenerative. I'd love it just to be called ag. In terms of everyone's doing it, so it is a thing. So I just think call out the bad, definitely on social media. Take photos of what awful things, mud flowing into rivers and people flailing hedges within an inch of its life, and really get quite aggressive about it and do all that. And there's definitely a groundswell of the public really caring about the environment and how the farmers are treating it and that sort of thing. And then we've got a little shop at home, a little regenerative farm shop. If you can find somebody that's got a farm shop, if you can go there and just spend a few quid a week and just support whatever they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it. There's lots of farms. I'm not quite sure where you're all from, but there's lots of farms now will offer to take you around and show you what they're doing and how they're doing it, and very proud of how they're doing it. Our hashtag on our farm is actually get on my land, which is we've opened new footpaths all over the place, and we do guided tours and walks and all that sort of thing, and just encourage people. And whenever I do a talk, the first thing I say to the general public is thank you very much for a third of your taxpayers' money being donated to me and the rest of the farming community for the last 35 years. Perhaps it's probably high time that I showed you what I did with your money. And that's something to remember. A third of the EU budget when we were in the EU went to ag, supporting millionaire farmers owning farms. I mean, the system's broken, smashed to pieces. We've got to change. And thankfully, the UK is, I said the UK, England is very different in Wales, but England at the moment are really starting, the government, I've got to be honest, are massively supporting regenerative farming practices. And I mean massively. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm quite surprised, actually.
Yeah, if they hadn't screwed the country up so much, I'd actually vote for them. But that's that's another thing. But I cannot fault the way DEFRA have decided that regenerative agriculture is the way forward. And if you follow the practices and those 5 key principles, we will actually support what you want to do. And you think, wow.
Great.
It's the first time I've ever farmed alongside the government and actually been in agreement.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, so Henrietta Court
Did I
says
answer the question? Sorry. Yes,
the
I think.
yes, it was a question. You've fully answered it. The animals are integral to regenerative. I can't even say it. Regenerative farming, says Henrietta Court. Do you ever eat them?
Of course. I'm not vegan. I've got a lot of vegan friends, and I own a vegan company or co-own a vegan company. We actually make kefir water, where all our waste fruit is actually made into kefir and then is sold and bottled on the farm. Because I've got no problem with vegans, and as I keep pointing out to those that hate vegans, especially from the farming community, don't they still eat food? It's rather quite important, that sort of thing. So I'm not quite sure the angle. Do I eat? Yes, I mean, our animals on our farm, I'm proud to show them to people. And I always tell people that they have a wonderful life and one bad day. And that's pretty much how we manage our livestock here. They literally do have the most wonderful life, and I'm very proud of the way we keep our chickens, our geese, our ducks, our goats, pigs, sheep, and cattle.
I
And
asked you because it's a very difficult conversation to have at the moment in many circles as to animals being part of sustainable agriculture, because there's a
yeah,
huge amount of publicity saying don't
yeah,
eat
no,
animals,
I
don't
agree.
drink milk.
So as I point out to a lot of people, there are two. I liken animal agriculture to the same as electricity production. Okay, you can produce electricity using wind and solar and produce a very green electrical product, and then you can dig a hole in the ground and dig out coal or oil and produce electricity rather quite horrifically. Animal agriculture is the same. You can stick thousands and thousands of cattle in a huge feedlot and then feed them from soya bean grown in Brazil as they're deforesting half of the Amazon. Or you can have them actually building your soil health by eating your cover crops and cycling all of that cover into wonderful natural fertilizer and building your soil health. And in actual fact, the two different things sadly end up as meat. And I think this is important for labeling in the future, that in actual fact, there should be two very different, distinct things. What is a regenerative animal being used as a tool, like our pigs are for regenerating our soil in terms of ready to replant, or our goats eating all of the weeds that we have, or whether they're mass produced in great big sheds and never see the light of day.
Yeah, really, really good point. Yeah, two different kinds of animal altogether.
Yes.
So, how can ordinary gardeners learn from this for a simple vegetable patch or allotment? That's a question from Alan, but it's a question that I'm very interested in as well. What I mean, obviously,
it's fantastic.
We can look at all the information you've given us about soil, but just give us a couple of tips for somebody with a vegetable patch.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because most of the things we do are learnt from permaculture and gardening, and then we try and scale it up, and they provide some huge challenges. One thing that I think is really disappointing that I see in most gardens is the way you waste your compost. Everybody makes a big rotting pile of anaerobic bacterias in what is terrible compost. In other words, what you're creating is basically an organic amendment rather than a biological living thing. And what I'd love gardeners to start learning, and I'm possibly going to write a book about it at some stage after I finish the one I'm writing at the moment, is if you actually Googled the Johnson Su bioreactor, and you made some Johnson Su bioreactors, which are very simple to make, very, very easy. Dr. David Johnson from the University of New Mexico has got some YouTube videos of how to make them. I've got them on my website as well. You can make them rather quite simply, and what you end up then is a wonderful biological inoculum. And this is something that we're massively lacking in soils, is this trophic levels of biology. We can create them very easy in a compost as long as we keep it aerobic rather than anaerobic. So that would be my first one. Second one would be.
Can you repeat
sorry?
that? Can you repeat that so I can just write it in the chat? Johnson's.
Johnson, as in David Johnson, and then Sue, S-U. It's David Johnson and his wife, something, I don't know what her first name is, but her surname's Sue. She's Chinese.
Oh, okay.
Chinese. So yeah, Johnson Sue bioreactor.
So we should make compost in the open air rather than in a plastic container.
Absolutely, because what you're doing in a plastic container is making anaerobic compost. So anaerobic compost is a soul food. It's hard to explain bokashi. We haven't really got time. I could do a whole present. I'm doing one tomorrow in Kent. Funny enough, on compost, because there is also a wonderful compost called bokashi, but that's an anaerobic, but it's a ferment, so very similar to a sauerkraut. But what most gardeners do is make a pile of rot. No, nothing in nature rots, because things only rot if you end up with big piles of things. If you think about leaves falling off a tree, they don't go deep enough that oxygen can't go all the way through and actually create a biological and keep oxygen flowing around it. It's only when you start piling and mounding things up do they become anaerobic. Now you can feed anaerobic bacteria into those and make a thing called bokashi compost, which is a Japanese anaerobic compost. But leave that. Stick with your Johnson Sue. They're very simple. They're very good. They're very great. And there's Facebook groups of Johnson Sue. There's all sorts of things for help and advice and all these things. They're fantastic. We have them on our farm. Just had somebody email me now about Johnson Sue. It's incredible, isn't it? Who's emailing me up? I say it noise. But there we are.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Is part of the problem that farmers are using fertilizers and pesticides which leach into rivers are not paying the full cost of the damage being done downstream?
100%. It's absolutely disgusting. But that's also government guidelines. I mean, from yesteryear, in so much as things like nitrogen and phosphate, it was just assumed, and we know that nitrogen recovery, for instance, we'll pick it doesn't matter what crop, but let's call it a winter wheat crop. If you put 100 kilos of nitrogen on a winter wheat crop, the efficiency is only 50%. 50% is used by the crop. So you put on, if that crop needs 200 kilos, you put 400 on, knowing that 200 is going to disappear. What nobody gives credit for is that 200 kilos has got to go somewhere, and generally in the environment. Either it volatilizes up as nitrous oxide, which is horrific, or nitrates going into watercourses causing nitrification and all those terrible things. Phosphate is even worse. Phosphate, more often than not, is only about 2% efficient. 98% of a lot of the phosphate you apply can actually end up in water courses, and I think we all know about eutrophication and the problems with phosphate. So it's a massive problem. Robbing from nature and not paying for it is a real problem. And more to the point, if you're putting all these fertilizers on and they're that poorly efficient, then it's costing you a fortune. So one angle to talk to farmers about is the fact that this is costing you a fortune. If you're polluting the environment, that means you've got a huge amount of waste. Well, waste is never a good thing. So it's like, it costs you £500 and £250 going down the drain, literally.
That's an interesting way of putting it. So we have two quite associated questions here. Kate is interested to know what proportion of farmers are now farming regeneratively. You may not have stats on that, but it'd be interesting about your feelings. And another question, do you have regen farm clusters around your farm? So what's your feeling about how it's expanding?
So my day job these days is as a regenerative consultant, helping people to get on this regenerative journey and not end up with yields dipping and profitability disappearing. My initial plan was to do 3 days consulting and spend the rest of my life on the farm loving life. And currently, I started this morning at 3:30 a.m. and I will finish at gone midnight tonight. And then I got to leave at 4:30 tomorrow to drive to Ely I've got a day in Cambridgeshire on regenerative farming, and then the Friday I'm in Kent giving talks on compost and that sort of thing, and then home. My inbox is continually full of farmers looking for help on regenerative agriculture and desperate to change. So the groundswell of change and movement is absolutely phenomenal. And I mean phenomenal. I couldn't give you figures of how many people are now regenerative farming, but all I can tell you is I wish there were 5 of me, because there was plenty of work out there for people helping farmers on the journey of regenerative ag. So it's really positive. In terms of cluster groups, do you know what? It's really hard to form cluster groups with agriculture because no two farms are anything like each other. I tried to organise various talks and put cluster groups together, and then you realise that one's got pigs and the others don't want to hear about the pigs, and one's got cows and the others don't want to hear about that, and one only grows 4 crops and one grows 11, and before you know it, it's so hard to actually try and push people together and come up with a common goal. It really is quite tricky in actual fact. I've tried and failed.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question and make one comment. Henrietta makes a perfectly good comment, which is to say that compost isn't always anaerobic. If you turn it and stir it and keep it moving, then maybe it isn't completely anaerobic.
Yeah, if you turn the biggest problem with turn compost. So I've done many courses, and I've been over to America and spent 3 weeks learning with Elaine about compost turning and trying to get it biological through compost turning. It's probably one of the most complex art forms of trying to get it biologically complete I've ever tried to do. I tried 42 different heaps of turned biological compost and failed on 41 times. We made one biological complete compost, which is why I always tell people to build a Johnson Seal. We've never had one fail yet.
Okay, point taken. So there's one particular question here. I'm just going to make it the last one. Are there any specific crops that don't produce well using regenerative farming methods?
No. I mean, I'm off to Zambia next week to do sugarcane and squash and corn. And I travel the world giving advice on all sorts of crops. I think the most important thing to remember with regenerative ag is that first slide I showed, that in actual fact, it's sunlight, it's rainfall, it's CO2, and most plants are green and got roots. And if you just assume that a plant is a plant is a plant, and so is the soil, and so is the environment in which it grows, albeit slightly different, then in actual fact, all regenerative practices work on pretty much every single plant. That's the beauty of planet Earth.
Wow. I don't know. I'm pretty speechless. I think that was absolutely extraordinary as a talk. Thank you so much. It is clear you could talk about this for 3 days, or quite a lot more actually.
Yeah.
But no, seriously, I personally I feel I've learned a massive amount about how just natural processes work. I will be watching this video myself again because there's an awful lot I didn't get first time around.
Yes.
So thank you very, very much indeed, and all the best to you with your 23-hour days and traveling around the world. The more you do this, the better. Maybe you need another business to train regenerative farming trainers.
Funny enough, we are building a regenerative school at the moment, so we are actually going to offer a degree in actual fact, a Bachelor of Arts in Agriculture, the first one in the world.
Brilliant. Great. Well, I feel very, very privileged that you were willing to come and talk to us. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem at all.
Thanks, Ben.